Hi guys, welcome back. Tonight let's talk about race relations. Specifically, if your only source of news and information was mainstream media, you would be convinced that the Democratic Party is the party that has helped the blacks and that the Republican Party has been the party that has done the most to hurt the blacks. When in truth, this is just the complete opposite. This is a complete 180. So tonight, that's what I want to talk about, how the parties works as far as race relations. Now we need to start in the 1850s. There was a senator named John C. Calhoun. At one point, he had been a Secretary of War under a president, and he had been a vice president under the first Democratic president, Andrew Jackson. Now, Calhoun was very pro-slavery. He owned a lot of slaves his entire life, and didn't see how America could survive without slaves. And actually, in his last speech in 1850, he declared that there would be ultimately two Americas. One that was free of slaves and one that would have slaves. And ultimately, that is what happened during the Civil War. Now, during the Civil War, of course, we know who the president was. It was Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln was a Republican. Actually, he was the first Republican president. Now, that party had formed after the Whig Party had went under. Now, the Whig Party, actually, slavery is what split them. And the abolitionists, or those that were against slavery, formed a new party. And the ones that were for slaves, and this is simplifying, I know, but this is in essence what happened. The ones that were for slavery joined the Democrats. So Lincoln is elected, and of course there are ultimately all these states that leave or secede from the Union. Now Lincoln tells them, if there is to be a civil war, I will not fire the first shot. The first shot will have to come from you. What happened? The first shot was fired by the South. Now, the South was led by a Democrat president, Jefferson Davis. His cabinet was Democrats. And, of course, they were all pro-slavery. Surprise, surprise, huh? Now, we know which side wins the war. Lincoln wins, the North wins, and Lincoln manages to get slavery abolished. Now, the people that were for giving blacks the right to vote and for making blacks equal, they were called the Radical Republicans. That's right, Radical Republicans, because apparently it was a radical idea for blacks and whites to be equal. Well, at the end of the Civil War, of course, Lincoln freed the slaves, but they needed a constitutional amendment that would make sure that slavery would not just reoccur. So the 14th and 15th Amendments. The 14th gave full rights and privileges to blacks. The 15th gave blacks the right to vote. Now, do I need to tell you which party was against these being passed? It was the party of good old, fair-minded, equal opportunity Democrats. They wanted no part of blacks and whites being equal. Now, the blacks having the full right to vote, just as an aside, I've always thought it funny that Lyndon Johnson has been the one that they said in all his civil rights acts that he did in the 60s. Said that he gave blacks the right to vote. Well, no, he didn't. It was the Republicans in the 1860s. And the Democrats are the ones that tried their damnedest to vote him down. Now, seeing that that way was blocked and that blacks were now free and full citizens, the Democrats tried another tactic. They created and used every chance that they got a group called the Ku Klux Klan. You may have heard of them. Matter of fact, I'm sure you've heard of them. Because every time you hear of them, it seems that the Republicans are blamed. When in essence, it was the Democrats that was responsible for the KKK. And the KKK's sole mission was for whites to be superior to, quote, those nigger lovers, unquote. Now let's fast forward ahead a few years, come into the 20th century. We're up to Woodrow Wilson's administration. Wilson was elected in 1912. He was president until 1920. Woodrow Wilson is who I say is the father of the modern Democratic Party. Wilson was the first true socialist in the White House. Woodrow Wilson, and this is fact again, this is fact, while president, watched a movie in the White House called Birth of a Nation. Now, it's not the one that came out recently, obviously. Birth of a Nation, the one from the early 20th century. Birth of a Nation was the birth of the KKK and how important the KKK was to America. Wilson watched this movie in the White House and gave a full endorsement of the movie. And the KKK that was waning in membership had a resurgence in the early 20th century because of Woodrow Wilson. Now fast forward a few more years, and we'll start to see where the Democrat and Republicans have swapped sides, it seems. Now, FDR was Franklin Roosevelt, and he was president during both the Great Depression and World War II. FDR created policies during his first couple terms to try to jumpstart the economy. Now, a lot of the programs. They say today, and this is them trying to fine-tune history. But a lot of the programs were for the blacks because the Democrats love blacks, right? Fast forward a few more years. Now you've got Lyndon Johnson in the White House. Lyndon Johnson, there's been very few bigger racists in the White House than LBJ, other than Kenyon Barry. LBJ was, for most of his time in the Senate, the majority leader. And he was the one that got to decide what came up for votes and what didn't come up for votes. And he was the one that spent most of his time as majority leader shooting down programs that would benefit blacks. Why? He was a racist. He didn't want blacks to be bettered. He didn't think blacks were equal to whites. It was only when he was president and the world was watching that he suddenly became the biggest friend the blacks ever had. And he did all these programs that were just so wonderful because he was such a great guy. When 25 years prior to that, he spent all that time shooting every program down that he was now endorsing. Now let's come forward a few more times. Look at today. You've got Chicago. You've got Detroit. I mean, you can name several largely black communities that have time and time and time for decades voted in Democrats. Why? Because they are convinced that the Democrats are their friends. But it's those same communities, time and time and time again, decade after decade, that don't have a pot to piss in. And it's because of the Democrats. Let me ask you this. How many abortion clinics have you ever seen built in white, affluent neighborhoods? You never will. Abortion clinics are built in the lower rent communities, in the housing subsidy communities, in the communities where the blacks live. Why? Because they know that it's the blacks that will use the abortion clinics. Because here's what they don't want you to know, boys and girls. By building these abortion clinics in the black communities, they are telling you definitely that black lives don't matter. If black lives mattered, they would be down there demanding these abortion clinics be shut down. Now let's talk about Kenyon Barry, the first black president. Kenyon Barry did more to set back race relations than the last 10 presidents before him. You know, how many times did he jump on a story about a shooting of a black guy by a white guy. And he would just hound the story into the ground, either to harp on and draw a wedge between the races, or to push his anti-gun agenda. One or the other, or both. How many times did he and how many times did he knowingly seek out a black on black shooting and do the same thing? He didn't. Because he didn't want you to know that the black on black way outnumbers the white on black. He doesn't want you to focus on anything but what he tells you. He doesn't want you to know that there are good cops. He just wanted you to see the cops that were shooting the thugs, the criminals. He wanted you to have that in your head while he was sucking up to the Black Lives Matter people, while he was sucking up to the race pimps of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Ladies and gentlemen, this makes me angry. Black lives do matter. White lives matter. Every life matters. But let's get the story straight. The Democrats are on the side of driving a wedge between the races. They are the ones that racially profile. They are the ones that are the racist, the bigots. That will never be printed by the mainstream media. Somebody has to tell you. Now it's your job, now that you know, to go tell somebody else. Until next time, good night and God bless.